Greetings, sisters, and welcome to Wonder Woman, Warrior for Peace. My name is Angela, and this is episode 6. Nothing preliminary to go over this month, so let's jump right into our first review. This is Sensation Comics, Volume 1, Issue 5, cover date March 1942. The writer was Charles Moulton, who we know was actually William Moulton Marsden, and the artist was Harry G. Peter. And I'm reading this from Wonder Woman Archives, Volume 1. Diana, Steve, and Colonel Darnell have been invited to the launch of a new submarine. Learning the governor's wife has been delayed, the honor of christening the sub is given to Diana. As she lifts the champagne bottle, Diana realizes it's too heavy, and so uses her super senses to deduce that it actually contains a high explosive. Thinking quickly, she uses her strength to tear the bottle from its ribbon and throw it too far, shouting that it slipped from her hand. The bomb lands on a nearby shoal, and the resulting explosion lets everyone know that a horrible disaster has just been averted. Offshore, we see a boat with Nazi spies watching the launch through binoculars, and with them is an American ensign. Back at the sub, it's realized that Ensign Martin has gone missing. He's instantly suspected of being the saboteur, but Steve insists the man is both his friend and loyal to the Navy. They get another bottle, and Diana successfully christens the sub the Octopus. It heads out on its maiden voyage, but soon the engines fail and the craft is stuck on the muddy bottom. Steve catches sight of an SOS flashlight signal coming from his friend Martin, trapped aboard the Nazi ship, but not realizing that Diana saw it too, tells her to return to the colonel. Instead, she changes into her costume, commandeers a speedboat, grabs the captain, and they both head out to where the signal originated. Aboard the vessel, Martin tries to stop the Nazis as they give the order to attack the sub's air supply. He's quickly knocked out, though, and they tie him up with weights and throw him overboard. Thankfully, Wonder Woman spots him and dives into the water, rescuing the man. He explains to Steve that he was attacked by the spies, who then delivered the bomb while disguised as him. When they finally reach the ship, Wonder Woman deflects a few bullets, then jumps on board. Steve follows, and they make quick work of the saboteurs. But when Martin climbs on the ship, the Germans think they're seeing a ghost and dive overboard. The Allies realize there's too many for the three of them to catch, but luckily a boat of girls from Holiday College, headed by Etta Candy, who else, happens to be nearby, so Wonder Woman flashes her silver bracelets in the sunlight to send them a message. The girls quickly round up the spies, and Etta is delighted to realize that her box of candy tastes like saltwater taffy after a dip in the ocean. Back on the ship, they intercept a radio transmission from a Nazi sub, saying they've trapped the octopus and are going to pump it full of carbon dioxide to knock out its crew. Wonder Woman jumps overboard and swims down to the sub, where a crewman in a diving suit has found and detached the carbon dioxide line. He's attacked by a Nazi boarding party, so Wonder Woman gets him to the surface, then dives back to investigate the German sub. She's caught by a robot arm and brought onto the ship, where she quickly smashes the controls and starts tearing it apart from the inside. But instead of leaving the men to drown like they'd planned to do to the Americans, she seals them in a compartment with the promise that she'll send a rescue crew. The amazing Amazon returns to the surface to see the octopus floating free now that the Nazi sub's magnetic trap has been destroyed. The issue ends with Etta and her gang bringing in their captives, the octopus being deemed a success for withstanding the enemy attack, the trapped Nazis getting rescued and taken away at gunpoint, and Steve Trevor's head too full of thoughts of Wonder Woman to notice Diana Prince sitting right next to him. The story in this one kind of reminds me of the plot of the TV show episode we just did last month, with the testing an experimental submarine now instead of a plane. The Nazis are trying to steal this new technology, and there's a complicated plot to make people think that the tests are a failure. The idea that Wonder Woman can tell that this bottle is full of explosives just by feeling the difference in the weight was kind of funny. That was kind of a problem that Superman had for a while there. His power was whatever the story called for. He could create clones of himself, he could transform Lois Lane into a gorilla, and all sorts of wacky stuff. The same thing with Wonder Woman sending Morse code signals to Etta Candy using her bracelets, just bouncing the sunlight off. Part of me wants to say that that's really creative, part of me wants to say that that's completely ridiculous. My opinion on Etta Candy is also changing a bit. She's just too ridiculous to try to apply any logic to. You kind of just have to go with the wackiness. So her candy falls into the ocean and comes out tasting like saltwater taffy. Okay, sure, fine, no problem. The artwork on the panels where Wonder Woman is swimming underwater are great. They've got a good sense of movement. And yet again, her star-spangled culottes are becoming a lot less like a skirt and a lot more like shorts. I liked that Ensign Martin got redeemed in the end, and the bit where Wonder Woman tells the people trapped in the sub that she's going to send help. I mean, this was a year and a half after Pearl Harbor, where ships were sunk and people were trapped inside and they couldn't get them out. So I'm glad that instead of leaving her enemies to the same fate, Wonder Woman was willing to send them help. Something I realized going over this Wonder Woman archive, the titles that are listed for each issue are not actually original. Those were made up for the collection. So I guess originally the stories would have been untitled. And also, I don't know what I was thinking last episode when I said that issue 4 was the first time we had the beautiful as Aphrodite, wise as Athena bit. That was in her very first appearance, back in All-Star Comics 8, so, oops! But, all in all, I liked this issue, so let's give it 3 stars. Next up is Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 6, Power Play. Cover date was July 1987. Plot and pencils was George Perez. Script was Len Wein. Inks was Bruce Patterson. Letters was John Costanza. Colors was Tatiana Wood. And the editor was Karen Berger. And I'm reading this from the Wonder Woman by George Perez omnibus. We start off with a quick recap in the form of a TV news report, then go back to the missile base from the end of last issue. Wonder Woman and her team gaze up in horror at the giant god of war standing in the missile silo. Ares monologues for a bit before disappearing in a cloud of smoke, so General Tolliver picks up where his master left off. As he rants about going into the master control room and using a key to launch a nuke straight at Moscow, Michaelis has Etta sneak him some gas grenades from Steve's pack, then gets Julia to tell Diana to rush the general when he gives the signal. As soon as Tolliver opens the armored control room door, the heroes strike. Grenades are thrown, and Wonder Woman charges at the enemy. Tolliver manages to slip into the control room, and Steve rushes after him just before the door slams shut. The rest of the renegade soldiers defeated, Diana tries to rip open the heavily armored door, cursing the god of war for his cowardice and telling him to face her in person. But as she struggles, there's suddenly a flash of light, and the Amazon princess disappears. Inside the missile control room, Steve finds Tolliver about to turn the key and launch the nuke. He blows the man away with his machine gun, saying he wished he didn't have to, but as he reaches to deactivate the launch, his hand is grabbed by the smoking, melting form of General Tolliver. Wonder Woman awakens in a world of pure blackness. Then, in a blast of light and thunder, Ares appears to answer her challenge. When she asks why he's doing all this, he answers that he's fulfilling ancient prophecy and keeping up the family tradition of a son killing his father and becoming more powerful than him. Uranus, Cronus, Zeus, and now Ares. He shows Diana visions of Steve fighting Tolliver's animated corpse, the war god's power causing violence around the globe, and his Russian followers preparing to launch a nuke from their own captured missile base. He then shows her her home, and we see that the plants on Paradise Island have died, the buildings are starting to crumble, and all the Amazons are withered with age. Hippolyta says she fears Diana has failed, but Philippus points out that if the princess were dead, they'd be dead too, and while there's still life, there's hope. These words bolster Diana, and she tries to attack, but Ares easily grabs her by the throat and raises her over his head. Hoping he can be defeated by his own power, Diana pulls out Harmonia's amulet and shoves it in his face, which angers him but at least makes him lose his grip. He surrounds her with flames, then shows her Etta, Julia, and Michaelis, who are too busy deactivating the base's security system so the American army can get in, to notice the fallen soldiers behind them rise up as a smoking, melting zombie army. Michaelis realizes at the last moment, and yells to the women to get down before being riddled with bullets. Once again we go to the underworld, where Athena is telling Artemis they must have faith in Diana. Persephone approaches, saying their journey across the river Styx can't wait any longer, but the two goddesses say Diana is still alive, so they're going to stay where they are. Still surrounded by fire, Diana slowly stands and grabs the lasso forged from the girdle of Gaia. Ares tries to blast her, but she takes off, swinging the lasso over her head and bringing it down around the war god's shoulders. The lasso forces Ares to see what will happen if his plan succeeds. A world covered in nuclear fire, and anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock has a real bad day as all flesh and bone burns to ash. Ares has one moment of triumph, then is left completely alone on a burnt-up, lifeless world. Confronted by the consequences of his actions, the war god weeps as, without any worshippers, his power fades and his palace, and ultimately Ares himself, crumbles to dust. His vision over, Diana tells the war god that he's got to stop this before it's too late. Ares agrees that balance must be restored, and we see his power cause the missile launch to fail, and Tolliver, and we're told his Russian counterpart, is reduced to a smoking pile of bones. Now in possession of the amulet, Ares vows that, while mankind's bloodlust still gives him strength, he will no longer actively seek their complete annihilation. He charges Diana to teach the world to save themselves from their own destructive power, then sends her back, saying that if she fails, mankind will hear from him again. Back at the American missile base, the army men are cleaning up, and General Hillary gets a report from a medic who says as soon as they got past the defenses, Tolliver's men were immolated. The only other casualty is Colonel McAllis, who died saving Lieutenant Candy and Professor Capitalis. Suddenly Steve comes out of the control room, crying for help and carrying the unconscious form of Wonder Woman. So I tried to come up with a way to summarize all the stuff Ares was saying here at the beginning, where he's standing in the missile silo and he saw this conflict is exquisite and the Amazons shall be destroyed and blah blah blah. Basically, I figured the best way to explain it would be to borrow from The Incredibles and say that he was monologuing. I mean, he is a comic book villain after all. One thing I forgot to mention last issue was that when Deimos' beard turned into a bunch of snakes and they wrapped themselves around Diana, they actually bit her and injected her with venom. So she mentions in this issue that she's still weakened from that, and that's why it's so difficult for her to fight against Tolliver's men and open the armored door.
And in fact, you can see in the artwork, her skin is just covered with these little bumps.
There's a great page here where Diana is disappearing into Ares' world, where there's a bunch of single-column, long, thin panels, and each one gets progressively darker, and you see Wonder Woman falling through, and she shrinks smaller and smaller each one. It manages to bring across exactly what's going on, even though it's kind of hard to describe. It's the kind of thing that only really works in a comic book. You can't even reproduce this in a movie, so that was really great. Ares explains that when his followers end up being all smoky and melty, that's actually a demonic spirit animating their corpse, so that was good to get clarification on that. Seeing Paradise Island in a ruined state and all the Amazons lying around hopelessly was really depressing and showed how, even when there's no actual conflict, Ares' power is sucking the life out of the world. The vision that the Lasso of Truth gives to Ares, I'm kind of like, did you not already think of this? I mean, what do you think is going to happen when the entire world is dead? When you're a god whose power is dependent on worshippers? I mean, come on. Although, when they show the lifeless husk that is the Earth after this apocalypse, it made me think, well, Superman's from another planet, and Green Lantern has space adventures all the time. It shouldn't be that difficult for him to just pick up and move to another planet, but I guess that's the kind of thing you're not supposed to pay too much attention to when you've got science fiction and fantasy mixed up in one world like they do in comics. I did find it a little odd that the way she was able to stop Ares was just to go, "You do know what's going to happen once you actually win, right?" And he's just like, "Oh, whoa, no, wait, that's a bad plan, never mind." So it felt a little abrupt, but at the same time I'm glad she was able to resolve the situation without punching her way out, unlike some caped crusaders I could mention. So again, kind of a dated 80s, mankind must learn to not destroy himself kind of thing. Kind of reminds me of Planet of the Apes, now that I think about it. But again, it was the Cold War, so I'm sure that felt a lot more relevant at the time. It's too bad about Colonel McAllis. We didn't really get to know much about him, other than the fact that he was Steve's friend, and he had a wedding ring, so presumably he's married. But he was a pretty good character for what we did see. He was resourceful and came up with good plans and was really loyal to Steve, so that was great. This was a pretty good issue, so I'm going to give it 4 stars. Next up, we have Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 6, Thrones. No mention of games, so I'll resist the urge to hum a certain theme song. The cover date was April 2012. Executive editor was Eddie Berganza. Cover artist was Cliff Chiang. Writer was Brian Azzarello. Penciler was Tony Akins. Inkers was Tony Akins and Dan Green. Colorist was Matthew Wilson. Letterer was Jared K. Fletcher. And the editors were Matt Idelson and Chris Conroy. And I'm reading this from Wonder Woman Volume 1, Blood. Picking up right where the last issue left off, Wonder Woman is struggling to free herself from Poseidon's tentacles. The sea god claims he will take Zeus's throne even if that means forcing Hera to kneel to him, and that the other gods can be happy with their domains or he'll destroy them. On Tower Bridge, the crowd notices the 2 centaurs and runs away in a panic as the horsemen corner Zola. Poseidon says that without a king, Queen Hera has nothing, but Wonder Woman retorts that she has nothing to lose. In the sewer, Lennox has been talking with the armored figure with the candle crown, who says the British man interests him. Lennox refers to the god as Lord Hades, but he calls himself Hell instead, 'cause, that's not a complete misunderstanding of the Greek concept of the underworld. Their conversation is purposely vague, with Hell asking if Lennox is sure he'll back down, which he is, and asking what the man wants from him, to which Lennox pulls out a cigarette and says he just wants a light. Meanwhile, Wonder Woman has tried to convince Poseidon that a deal can be struck with Hades, but he's not in the mood. He flings the Amazon back to Tower Bridge, and in the air she spots the centaurs closing in on Zola. Wonder Woman lands, rips up a flagpole, and uses it to simultaneously pole vault over and momentarily stun a charging centaur. She apparently kills the next one with her bare hands, as all we see is Zola hiding under a truck. No, wait, we're in the UK, so I guess it's a lorry. And then a splash of blood, followed by Wonder Woman lifting the vehicle over her head, both arms stained red up to the bicep. She tosses it at the remaining centaur, then grabs Zola and jumps over the bridge onto the tail of the departing sea god. Exiting the sewer, Lennox and Hel meet up with Hermes and are quickly joined by Poseidon. Wonder Woman, still carrying Zola, jumps down to join the conversation. Hel, who insists on calling Zeus Heaven and Poseidon Sea, asks the Lord of the Ocean what he thinks of the Thunder God's children's proposal. He was too busy ranting to hear the whole thing, so Wonder Woman explains. By day Poseidon will be king, by night Hades, and they'll share Hera as queen. How this is supposed to work when the round globe means it's always day and night somewhere, I don't know, but let's not think about that right now. Poseidon thinks the idea is preposterous, while Hel seems intrigued, but Hera, appearing in a flash of lightning, is having none of it. The gods bicker for a bit before Lennox, bending down to light his cigarette with the flame from Hel's crown, breaks off a candle and tosses it to Wonder Woman. Hermes throws the Amazon his caduceus, and she disappears in a ball of blue light. An enraged Hera teleports in a huge explosion, which Lennox has to shield Zola from with his indestructible body. The Queen of the Gods is too late, though, arriving on Mount Olympus a moment after Wonder Woman has thrown the candle, still lit, onto the portal the gods use to watch the mortal world. The portal cracks and goes black, and Hera vows to destroy Wonder Woman. Referring to the magical transformation of her mother and sisters, the Amazon says she already has, and so Wonder Woman will now spend her time making the Queen of the Gods regret it. She activates the caduceus again and disappears just as Hera tries to grab her. She reappears back at the shore of the Thames, having been gone only a moment. Poseidon is amused that she tricked them, while Hel is decidedly more annoyed and takes off down the sewer tunnel. The god of the sea asks if this was all about destroying Hera's ability to watch Earth, but Wonder Woman says it was to protect Zola and her child. The 2 demigods and Hermes watch as Poseidon swims away, then turn to see Zola headed into the sewer tunnel. The mortal woman is amazed to see what looks like her dead mother beckoning to her, but then the figure distorts and shoots out black tendrils that wrap themselves around Zola and drag her down the tunnel. Wonder Woman runs after her only to be confronted by an image of Hel, who says they had a deal, and she must keep her end of the bargain or die. So we went over the division of the sky, the sea, and the underworld last episode. We should probably focus a little bit more on the underworld, so you can understand why calling Hades Hell annoys me. In Greek mythology, where you went after you died didn't really have anything to do with how morally good of a person you were, like we have with the Judeo-Christian tradition. Not that salvation by works is actually part of Judeo-Christian teachings, but let's not go down that rabbit trail. Everyone who died ended up in the Greek underworld, no matter how good or bad you'd been. Most people ended up in the fields of asphodel. There are different interpretations depending on which Greek myths you're reading, but generally it seems to be kind of just a generic meadow where you would just wander around for all eternity. It's certainly no eternal paradise, but it's not punishment either. For punishment, you have the aptly named Fields of Punishment. That's where people would go who had committed crimes against the gods. The good part of the underworld was Elysium, but you couldn't get there by being a morally good person. You had to specifically be a hero and do mighty deeds, kind of a bit like Valhalla in Norse mythology. The difference between Elysium and what we would think of as heaven is that the gods don't live in Elysium. It's just those who are deemed heroes, who usually were demigods. The Isles of the Blessed are the true ultimate paradise in Greek mythology. When you got to Elysium, you could choose to stay there or be reborn. So if you chose to be reincarnated 3 times, and each time was worthy of Elysium, you would end up in the Isles of the Blessed. At the other end of the spectrum, you have Tartarus. That's the closest you have to our traditional view of hell. Technically, it wasn't part of the underworld, it was far, far beneath. But you'd have to be a really atrocious human to end up there. Mostly it was inhabited by the Titans after they were defeated by Zeus and the other Olympians. So while most modern stories will portray the god of the underworld as a villain, in the original Greek myths he wasn't really a bad guy, he was more kind of just doing his job. You know, the dead need a place to go, that place needs a ruler, he's the god for the job. So calling him hell is kind of just as inaccurate as calling Zeus heaven. Technically, Zeus is the king of the sky, where the gods live, but no one actually ends up living with the gods after they die. So it's only roughly equivalent to what most people think of when they hear the word heaven. At one point it is mentioned that Lennox is a child of Zeus and a mortal woman just like Diana, so I guess that clears up where he came from. What we couldn't tell about Hades really last issue was that he's only about the height of a child, maybe 13 to 14 years old. He doesn't even come up to Lennox's shoulder, and while Lennox isn't a small guy, he's not exactly Hagrid. Or, wait, I should use a comic book reference. He's not as big as the Hulk. So Hades is definitely supposed to be more childlike, though the fact that half of his face is covered in wax makes that hard to tell. I'm not exactly sure how Wonder Woman knew that a candle from Hades' crown, now see I'm still calling him Hades, a candle from Hell's crown would break the reflecting pool kind of thing that Hera was using to watch her. So I was a little bit confused at first, but rereading the issue I was able to figure out what was going on a lot more easily. Using the image of a dead loved one to lure a person back into the underworld, I can't think of an example where that specifically happened in Greek myths, but it definitely reminds me of Orpheus. He was a really great poet and musician in ancient Greece, and when his wife died, he took the trip the long way to the underworld, and he played his music for Hades, and the god was so moved that he agreed that he would give him one chance to save his wife. He could lead his wife back to the mortal world, but he had to walk in front and not turn around to look at her even once, until they are both out of Hades. The place is named after the god. It can get a little confusing at times. He managed to make it, but he turned around too quickly when she was still in the underworld, and so she got sucked back down, and he lost her for good. Because this is the end of this volume, there is some artwork at the back that I'm just going to go over. You've got concept art for some of the different characters, so you can see the different designs that they went through in coming up with the way they were going to look, as well as rough sketches of the covers so you can see the different design changes that those went through. So despite my annoyance at getting the Greek mythology a bit wrong, I still like this issue, so let's give it 3 stars. Moving on, we have the Wonder Woman TV show, Season 1, Episode 5, The Feminine Mystique, Part 2. Air date was November 8, 1976. Starring Linda Carter and Lyle Wagner, Drusilla was played by Deborah Winger, Queen Hippolyta was played by Carolyn Jones, Captain Radel was played by John Saxon, and Lieutenant Wirtz was played by Paul Shinar. After a short recap of last episode, we see Steve and Diana discussing the missing Drusilla. Diana has called the police and hospitals but can't find her anywhere, so Steve asks if there's somewhere she might have gone. She says her sister may have gone home, but her family doesn't have a telephone, so she can't call and check. Steve offers her a few days off to go home, but she says she'd rather stay in D.C. for the time being. At the deserted warehouse where the Nazis are keeping Drew, Peter Knight remarks that this Wonder Woman reminds him of a girl he met, though obviously she's not the same person. To test whether their captive really is Wonder Woman, Knight, hiding a bulletproof vest under his shirt, is thrown into her cell as if he'd been kidnapped. Captain Radel fires at him, but Drew blocks the shot with her bracelet. She then tries to escape but is quickly taken out with chloroform, and her bracelets are removed. There's a quick scene of Diana telling Steve that Knight didn't show up to the airfield that morning, then we see him at the Nazi hideout doing experiments on Drew's bracelets. He can't even tell if the metal is natural or an alloy, so Radel decides they'll have to get Wonder Woman to tell them where they came from. Knight wonders if, since that girl she reminds him of had a schoolgirl crush on him, maybe he can use his charms to trick their captive. When she finally awakens, he's passed out on the cell floor next to her. She rouses him, and he says they can escape with her strength and ability to block bullets. She says she can't without her now missing feminine bracelets, and when he asks what feminine is, she lets it slip that the only source for it in the world is the mine on Paradise Island. Realizing she wasn't supposed to let anyone know about Paradise Island, she says she's revealed too much, but Knight says she hasn't since he doesn't know where it is. As Radel listens in, poring over a map, she says that no one can find Paradise Island unless they know where it is first, since light refraction keeps it hidden. Knight says it must be beautiful there, then leads Drew on to give a ridiculously detailed description of the night sky, which allows Radel to pinpoint the location. He pulls Knight out of the cell, then shows him that according to the charts there's nothing at those coordinates. The American is still convinced, though, so Radel agrees to radio Berlin the information but keep their prisoner alive in case she's lying, while Knight will return to the XPJ-1. At the War Department, after learning that Diana still can't find a trace of her sister, Steve receives an intercepted German transmission that originated off the coast of Florida. They're ordering a land attack in the middle of nowhere, but Diana recognizes the coordinates as the location of Paradise Island. She tells Steve she's changed her mind on taking some leave, then rushes home in the invisible plane. She greets her mother and finds out that Drew isn't there. She tells the Queen about the Nazi invasion headed their way, somehow knowing they're after the feminine mine. Hippolyta puts her in charge of the defense force, though not after naively asking if they can reason with the Nazis. Hoping to avoid alarming the entire island, Diana recruits a small group of Amazons, who, for some reason, think that being attacked by Nazis sounds like fun, and the Queen insists on coming along as well. Back at the XPJ-1 testing facility, we get a quick scene of Knight introducing Steve to the plane's new chief mechanic, Harvey Manning, who we recognize as Lieutenant Wirtz in disguise. Then it's back to Paradise Island, where the invasion force, led by Captain Radel, is storming the beach. Diana finds her lookouts playing children's games instead of, looking out, and chides them that their negligence could ruin all their plans. Her sisters are more interested in getting to meet men, though, again missing the whole Nazi invasion force thing. Unsurprisingly, when the Germans actually arrive, the air-headed Amazons, while strong, are easily taken out by a few smoke bombs. There is some good news, however. Back in the States, Drusilla is able to escape and reclaim her bracelets. She calls the War Department, learning that Diane is on leave and Steve is at the airport. She heads there in civilian garb, claiming to be Steve's niece. She explains she was taken prisoner, but he doesn't believe her. Drew sadly tells him Knight was captured and killed, but Steve tells her he's been at the airfield this entire time, except for taking one morning off. Learning that Diana went home looking for her, the teenager says Knight must be a spy. She tells Steve to confront him about Radel and where he was on his morning off. And when he does, the engineer tries to run, but is swiftly caught. Drew then flies her own invisible plane back home. We see that the Nazis have taken over Paradise Island and are holding the Queen hostage to force the Amazons to mine the feminum. Hippolyta tells Diana that she must lead their people against Radel and his men, even if that means risking the Queen's life. As Wonder Woman is transporting the ore to the beach, Drusilla reveals herself to her sister and quickly knocks out the guard. She tells Diana that she accidentally revealed the location of Paradise Island, and Diana says it's not her fault, even though it totally is. Saying there are 10 Nazis holding them captive, yes, all of 10 holding an island of supposedly warrior women, Wonder Woman devises a plan to get the Amazons' bracelets back. Taking advantage of the fact that the men can't tell them apart because of their similar costumes, Drew takes Diana's place at the mine and lets the other miners know their plan. 2 of the Amazons start a fake fight, drawing away the guards so Wonder Woman can retrieve their stolen bracelets. She tries to pass the bracelets out secretly, but the Nazis find their fallen comrade and sound the alarm. Drew takes the bag and distributes the bracelets as Diana attacks, her sister soon following suit. But when victory seems assured, Radel appears and threatens Hippolyta with a gun, commanding her subjects to take off their bracelets or the old woman will die. Annoyed by the name-calling, the Queen has Diana throw her a bracelet, which she holds up as a shield in front of Radel's gun, telling him to either shoot and risk the bullet bouncing back and hitting him, or admit defeat by an old woman. He smartly drops his firearm. Their enemy defeated, the Queen hugs her daughters, saying that wasn't really that bad after all. At which point I yell at my TV, "Wasn't that bad?" Back at the palace, Hippolyta tells her daughters that the men will be given a drug to make them forget the last week, then put out to sea in their own boats for the American Navy, notified by Diana, to pick up. When Drew points out that the Nazis know the location of Paradise Island and may send more forces, the Queen says Radel told her they weren't sure if her information was correct, and with the invasion force captured and memoryless, they'll think she lied. Diana learns from Drew that Peter Knight was a spy, so before Radel's memory is wiped, she questions him with the golden lasso. He reluctantly tells her that Knight was found out and captured, but Lieutenant Wirtz, disguised as the chief mechanic, plans to take Steve's place and fly the XPJ-1 to a secret Nazi landing field. The Queen, now realizing the importance of Diana's work, allows the two to go to America to stop him, though Drew is ordered to return home afterward. At the airfield, we see Wirtz knock out Steve in the locker room and head to the XPJ-1, his pilot's helmet and goggles hiding his features. As the plane is taxiing, Wonder Woman appears and asks for the chief mechanic, but no one knows where he is. She rushes to the XPJ-1, grabs a wing, and starts spinning the plane in circles. After a recovered Steve appears, Wirtz jumps out and starts running. Just when it seems he's gotten away, he finds himself confronted by Drew. After a successful test flight, Steve learns that Wirtz turned himself in, rambling about a teenage girl as strong as 10 men. Diana Prince shows up along with her sister, whom Steve scolds for running off, and the episode ends with the 3 celebrating at a soda fountain. So, this review is going to be a bit more rant-like than normal, 'cause this episode kinda broke me. I mean, I watched it twice, and you know how sometimes stuff is better the second time? No, it wasn't. But before I go off on it, I do want to clarify that it's the feminum mystique, not feminine mystique. I think I got that mixed up last time. Where to begin with this episode? Most of the characters seem to have a weird cavalier attitude throughout the entire episode. I mean, Diana's teenage sister, who's never been to man's world, disappears in Washington, D.C. during wartime. And Diana's just like, "Oh, I can't find her. How troublesome." Are you serious? If my sister disappeared in a big city like that, I'd be worried sick and doing everything I can to find her. And she hasn't been a teenager for a long time. Oh, and if you're one of the few people who listen to this show who knows me in real life, never tell her I said that. And then the scene where Knight is able to weasel the location of Paradise Island out of Drew. It's so ridiculous. He's asking these ridiculously specific questions about, where's this constellation in the night sky? And at what degree does the sun rise? And it's just like, how can you be this daft? I get that you're a teenager with a crush, but come on! This is such weirdly specific information that he's asking you and you're giving him, and There's no reason to get that detailed, especially when you're trapped by the enemy. Sure, maybe she's not familiar with microphone technology, but come on. And then when Diana gets to Paradise Island and says, "Mom, Nazis, we gotta do something," and Hippolyta's just like, "Oh, okay, if you say so, dear." Seriously? You're being invaded by an army of men. May I remind you that men are not supposed to set foot on Paradise Island? Oh, maybe we can reason with them. They're Nazis! At this point, your daughter's been fighting them for what, months? Maybe you should listen to her when she tells you they can't be reasoned with. And the Amazons! They're being told by their princess, who has been fighting these people for months, "Hey, bad guys coming, we need to defend our home." Do they listen? No! You're supposed to be warriors, and yet you're sitting there playing jacks when you're supposed to be looking out for the enemy. And when the Nazis actually do show up, they're like, "Oh, maybe they can play with us. Aren't they so cute? They're men, ha ha ha." Seriously! Seriously! Just seriously! You deserve to be defeated at that point. You're supposed to be warriors, and you're literally like, "Ooh, they can play games with us." Just... To be fair, the episode is a little confusing. They first say that Wonder Woman has a small force to defend themselves against the Germans, but then it seems like they've taken over all of Paradise Island, but you still only see a few Amazons. So I don't know if they just captured the mine and just nobody else noticed, or whether 10 Nazis really did take over the entirety of Paradise Island. Even after they're victorious, the Queen's just like, "Oh, good, that mild inconvenience is over." Seriously, mild inconvenience. Captain Radel said that after they cleaned out the mine, they were going to take the Amazons back to Germany to study their strength and use them for breeding purposes to create better Aryans. And you're just like, "Oh good, that's over with. Now I can get back to my comfortable palace." Seriously? You were supposed to be the wise queen of this island, and you were acting like an old lady at a restaurant where it's packed and you can't get your usual table. I mean, I try to be a bit more lenient with the TV show, and the same with the 40s comics, because, you know, they're a product of their time. To us today, they mostly come across as cheesy. But this episode was just so dumb. Maybe it's not fair for me to judge them on rules that haven't been mentioned in the show, like men aren't allowed to set foot on Paradise Island. But really, I just can't. I'm sorry. I have to give this episode 1 star. It was just too dumb. Okay, on to some news. Six Flags has announced they are opening 2 new Wonder Woman Lasso of Truth rides at Six Flags America and Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. The first is a giant swing ride, like the kind where there's a giant ring with individual swings hanging down and you sit in it and the ring raises up, and as it raises it spins faster and faster and eventually you're about horizontal. The second is going to be a giant pendulum thing with a round kind of carousel bit at the bottom where you're facing out and spinning around and round and swinging back and forth. At Six Flags Magic Mountain, they already have a ride called Wonder Woman Lasso of Truth, and that's one where you're standing on the edge of a big round platform with your back to the wall, and it spins really, really fast, and then tilts up to about 45 degrees. So, look, I'm a Wonder Woman fan, but I'm not that much of a Wonder Woman fan. I prefer to keep all 4 wheels firmly on the ground. If somebody else wants to go to these new rides that open next year and give a special report, be on the podcast, you are more than welcome to. You can contact me, but I am not going on those anytime soon. In other news, the restaurant chain Whataburger is having a, quote, friendly trademark discussion with DC about the new Wonder Woman logo. They think it looks too much like their Whataburger logo, which is, what was that, 5 orange W's all stacked on top of each other? Apparently, when the original symbol was
registered in the mid-'80s, they didn't have a problem with it, mostly because it was supposed to be for comic books and not restaurant stuff like food and drink. But they're specifically saying they've got a problem with the new Wonder Woman logo for the movie. Apparently this kind of lawsuit has happened before with DC. They actually tried to sue DC Shoes to say that their logo was too similar to the DC Comics logo at the time, but apparently they hadn't actually trademarked their logo properly. So they ended up having to pay the shoe company for, I guess, a little while there. I mean, the DC logo's been redesigned, 3 times in the last 11 years? Hopefully the new one they came out with this year will actually stick. But anyway, I'm hoping DC and Whataburger will come to terms over this. I mean, it really doesn't look like the Whataburger logo any more than the... Oh, maybe it's the fact that there's all those lines through it. Yeah, the new Wonder Woman logo, well, it looks like it's made of metal, and it's got all these ridges kind of on it, which does kind of remind you of the really tight zigzag pattern of the Whataburger logo. Hopefully they'll be able to come to terms with this, because I really like the new Wonder Woman logo, and I'd like it to stay around. Also, the fan artist Josh McMahon has released a video on his website, fanartexhibit.com, of him putting together one of his Wonder Woman Photoshop manipulations. The design is back from 2010, way before the movie was announced, but apparently he found the footage recently and so put it up online for people to see. He's probably most well known for his Lady Avengers series, back when the first Avengers movie was coming out, where he photoshopped female designs for the different characters and cast them with different actresses. But I've really been a fan of his work since back in 2008. His designs are actually what first got me interested in a movie version of the character. Before then, I knew her just as a member of the Justice League and kind of thought she was just this dated character in a star-spangled bathing suit. But the way he fused her classic look with kind of a Greek armor design was really cool. In fact, the sign-off I used for this show, Hopes May Fade, but Wonders Never Cease, I actually took that from the first poster that I saw of his that made me go, whoa, a Wonder Woman movie could be really cool. Also, this past weekend in Cleveland, Ohio, the public library had a Wonder Woman Symposium. There were a bunch of different Wonder Woman artists and writers, including Phil Jimenez and Amanda Connor and Cameron Stewart. There were a bunch of pictures taken, and from what I'm reading, according to their Twitter, they had a record set for the most Wonder Woman characters in one place. So I will link to photos of that in the show notes. Lastly, but certainly not leastly, is that a word? Anyway, the I'm the Gun podcast came out with an episode celebrating the 75th anniversary of Wonder Woman by actually going back and looking at what happened at her 50th anniversary. The host, Mark, goes over the War of the Gods major crossover event that happened back in 1991 in celebration of Diana's 50th anniversary. So definitely go check that out. He was kind enough to play a promo for Warrior for Peace on that show. The podcast generally seems to review issues of the Legion of Superheroes and Marvel's Shanna the She-Devil. But if you're not interested in that, he also has an episode about Green Lantern's 75th anniversary and a recap of the first appearance of Lady Blackhawk back in the 50s. And if you're unfamiliar with her, she would go on to join the all-women superhero team, the Birds of Prey. So definitely give I'm the Gun a listen. You can find it on iTunes and at his website, imthegun.blogspot.com. And that's I'm without an apostrophe, so just IMTHEGUN. And before I go, I just want to give a quick thank you to Diablo Frank for mentioning Warrior for Peace on his newest episode of Diana Prince Wonder Woman podcast. I'm really excited to hear that that's going to be coming out more often. You can find links to all of this stuff, of course, in the show notes, and you can read those at the podcast website, wonderwomanwarriorforpeace.wordpress.com. So that's it for this month. If you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, conundrums, or queries, you can email me at wonderwomanwarriorforpeace@gmail.com. If you're okay with your message being read on the podcast, please let me know. You can check out the show's main website, wonderwomanwarriorforpeace.blogspot.com. There you can download the episode directly or find the links to the iTunes and Stitcher feeds. You can look the show up on Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, and Instagram under Wonder Woman Warrior for Peace, and on Twitter and Pinterest as Wonder Woman WFP. The intro music was Wonder Woman theme, The Best Themysciran Symphony Dialogue Dance Mix by Taz Damien Devil, and you can watch the full video on his YouTube channel. The outro music is Wonder by the Doubleclicks, and you can find them on their website at thedoubleclicks.com. Next episode, I will be reviewing Sensation Comics Volume 1, Issue 6, Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 7, Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 7, and Wonder Woman Season 1, Episode 6. But until then, remember, sisters, hopes may fade, but wonders never cease.
'Cause you're not a quitter, you still believe the truth's in your lasso, your heart's on your sleeve, and when we're drowning in darkness, you'll save us all from going